Hi everybody, and welcome to the weekly address for the week of uh, January 31st. And today I would like to, in a nutshell, rehash some stuff I started last week. First of all, the two things I'm going to talk about are the Urantia book, which I now have in hardcover. Really nice. And the Betty book by Stuart Edward White. And actually, Stuart White has 3 books here. And what these are apparently Andrew Jackson Davis style readings. Now, the reason I say that is they have shed so much light. See, he describes the process in this first book, and it sheds so much light on the nature of this other type of reading, where the person doesn't completely go out in deep trance, but there's still a little bit of conscious mind left. He sheds so much light on that kind of process that I'm very confident now that that's what Andrew Jackson Davis was doing, because it's very similar to what Andrew Jackson Davis describes when he talks about his process in dictating the principles of nature. Wow. So yeah, might as well start with that. So the Betty book is about, I don't remember her name. Maybe he doesn't even give her name. But the time period, anyway, that's one of the important things. This book came out in 1937. I mean, notice the timing here. You know, you have this in 1937, so these people were doing psychic reading kind of things. And then the Urantia book coming out in 1955, but it was actually started in like 1925. And there was apparently I got word from a guy that knows a little more about it, that there was apparently a kind of preliminary edition sent around to members of the forum, the people that asked questions, in like the 30s or something. So that would be right on with this. And during that time, Edgar Cayce was still alive, giving readings and things. So they all overlap. But this guy started out working with an Ouija board, or a planchet. The planchet is like the thing on the Ouija board that's like triangle shaped and has the clear part in the middle. And apparently they used to use planchets just by themselves, and you could like attach a pencil to it or something so it would write. And they'd put it on big sheets of wallpaper or something, so they had a lot of writing surface and let it go. But not that I condone that. And first of all, I guess it would be good to start to point out that I have from several of these people that seem to know more on it, so I guess I could say I have it on good authority. The first one that comes to mind is namely Hugh Lynn Casey. Hugh Lynn wrote a good book about this. He wrote a book about paranormal phenomena in general. And he wrote about his experiences because of who he was, you know, being Edgar Cayce's son. He was often called in when people had problems with like ghosts or demon possession or God knows what else. And so he would see a lot of this stuff. And a lot of the problems with people being possessed and things that he saw were a result of people messing around with automatic writing or an Ouija board. So apparently, if just your average Joe goes around and starts messing around with this stuff, you're opening yourself up to, I guess, disincarnate entities that are still hanging around the earth for whatever reason, instead of going on to bigger and better things. So a lot of those may be malevolent, and they feed on fear and probably what the Christian religion would term demons and things like that. But according to the perspective of these works, actually they're just disincarnate souls that don't really have any real power except from the ability to maybe move the occasional object a little bit if they really focus, or maybe manifest themselves so they're slightly visible if they really focus, or do the possession kind of thing, or speak through people if they're mediums or doing automatic writing or stuff like this. And the way it would happen in a lot of these cases is the person would be doing automatic writing, and then it would get, they wouldn't use any kind of protections. So, like Douglas Cottrell, for example, he'll use a prayer where he says, "Dear Lord, protect us from all negative influences, regardless of source." And that's like verbatim what Ross Peterson used. And Paul Solomon had something similar. I don't know if it's worth looking up exactly what it was. They have a thing called Paul Solomon's Prayer that would appear at the beginning of every reading. And here's apparently what Paul Solomon would say before he started every reading. "We speak now to living love as the Christ, and we invoke in this room the divine presence, the sacred name, and the living being of the Christ. And we ask that you manifest yourself here with us in this room in such a way as to make it a holy place. Hold each one of us in this room and make our minds and our hearts fit and ready to be a holy temple with the source of love, of wisdom, and of understanding. And in that presence, we ask that you will find this, my body, acceptable as we offer it as an instrument for communication. We ask that you surround us with the protection of your presence and cause no thought or idea not comfortable with the presence of Christ to exist here. Allow that my own consciousness be set aside so effectively that my body may be used purely by the Christ for the communication of divine will and direction and purpose in this moment. This we ask and expect according to the promise of Christ, where there are two or more gathered in my name. And so we know that you are here, and so it is. Amen." So that was Paul Solomon's prayer. Pretty cool, eh? And Edgar Casey, I know they did something similar. And so the idea is that if the medium's focus is upward, so if it's on high ideals, if it's on their concepts of heaven or God or higher consciousness, the Christ consciousness, higher mind, things like that, if that is their focus, then according to these sources, it's basically impossible for any kind of lesser being or malevolent entity to take over the person. So that kind of avoids the risk of possession and things. So apparently what Hugh and Casey would run into is a lot of people that didn't do that kind of thing. And I read a couple books that this referred to that were contemporary accounts with it of people's experiences with planchets and Ouija boards. And in those cases, those people didn't take any such precautions, at least that they wrote down. They didn't say anything like that. I don't know. I haven't looked at the instructions in the box on the Ouija board. Maybe it would be nice if they had something like that as part of the instructions. Oh, by the way, I don't know if they do, or did back then. So, yeah, I guess I'd just like to say that automatic writing and the Ouija boards and those types of things where you're basically opening yourself up as a channel for communication in a, well, and I guess even this other way, you're in any case where you're opening yourself up as a channel for communication, it's apparently vital that you have the appropriate, as a medium, that you have the appropriate focus, and that, I don't want to really say you've said the right magic spell, but of course what those things do is they're directing your conscious mind when you read those words, so it's kind of a way to focus your intent before you start. So obviously it's very important to protect yourself with those kind of things, and Paul Solomon does have even more things where you can do to protect yourself, ritual kind of things. I just had I just had kind of a flashback. This stuff reminds me of the Necronomicon. Not that I encourage anyone to get into the, whatever you call that, the occult literature or anything, but it was like that. It had like spells and things that you were supposed to do to protect yourself, and they were actually very similar. And if you get into the Aleister Crowley and all this, these whacked out people kind of stuff, the magic with the CK kind of things, they really seem to have this perspective of white magic, dark magic, and the white magic kind of stuff really seems to be very similar to a lot of the things you see here. So obviously, if there is any kind of interaction going on there, it is the same spiritual realm. Some other universe isn't going to naturally create itself just because those people have a different viewpoint. So obviously they have to take the same kind of precautions unless they want to, go down that darker path where it leads to things. And I guess one of the main things is a lot of these discarnate entities that are not so nice will apparently feed on fear. So people are kind of afraid anyway, and they'll just kind of feed on that and build on that because they get some kind of kick out of it or energy from it, or they think they will, or something like that. I have no idea. So I just would like to very clearly say that I'm not endorsing people. You don't see me going into automatic writing just because I read this. And what's interesting is, okay, so what happened with these people is he started trying some automatic writing with a group of friends, and the board kept saying, get Betty, get Betty, get Betty. And Betty was this other one of their friends that was just standing across the room because she didn't want anything to do with it. So they finally convinced her to get to the board. And while it was communicating through her, periodically it kept going back to the same phrase. It kept saying, get a pencil, get a pencil, get a pencil. And so she, they didn't think much of it, and they didn't think they were supposed to go along with that or didn't feel like it. So apparently when she went home later that night or the next day or something, she did try just holding a pencil over a piece of paper and seeing what would happen. And sure enough, she was able to write even more clearly with a pencil, which is what automatic writing is, or basically, so this person is. Should I even demonstrate this? Oh, well, fine. This guy gives a technique in the book, so I'll demonstrate it. But look, it's definitely not something that is the first thing to start, because or to deal with in general, because what happened with her is later on they basically, the entities speaking through her weaned her. They were benevolent entities. They weaned her of this process. But basically what the guy described is when he would do it. Oh, so this would have been. I'm getting confused here because I was reading a couple books he referred to. I think it was another guy that was doing automatic writing, was talking about this. The way he would do it is he would hold like a few inches from the tip of the pencil and let the pencil rest on the paper, and have his whole arm and elbow off the table. So it's not like you would normally hold the thing. And then he would do whatever he had to do, blank his mind, or just sit there and wait for something to happen. But yeah, and again, from what I know or have learned so far, there should be no real danger in doing something like that if you are taking the proper precautions. If you're saying like a statement like that, "Dear Lord, please protect us from all negative influences, regardless of source." But what's interesting to me is that, like in this Betty book, what the entities like communicated through her for like a year. And during that time, they were giving her directions for how to move beyond that, how to become a channel. And they got to a point where they said, okay, in September, we're going to stop communicating this way. And they did. They would no longer do the automatic writing through her. She would just hold the pencil there and nothing would happen, I guess. And then they apparently never went back to it. And the whole point was that it's apparently an inferior type of communication for many reasons. And again, I'm taking a long time to get to the point. The point is, along the way, they described And apparently later on, they continued to describe the type of communication they were after. And it wasn't the same type of channeling that like Edgar Cayce would do. They did talk about that. For some reason, in her case, they told her to avoid it. But the basic idea is that you do go down through those subsequent levels of relaxation and trance. You do go down into these deeper and deeper trance states. But they told her to get down to a state where her subconscious, if you will, or at least part of her mind was still, I think they did mention subconscious, was still aware enough to pay attention to what was going on and to remember it. So it might have even been kind of a conscious state. And that's what it really sounded like, that her conscious mind was always still there, and it would just have to get out of the way. And there apparently were 2 or 3 different ways she could communicate that way. One way is she could witness something consciously, so she would have this paranormal awareness when she's in that trance state, which is exactly what Andrew Jackson Davis described. But anyway, so she would get into this trance state where she would have a conscious paranormal awareness. She would be able to go out of body, have this astral projection kind of thing, and go wherever her thoughts sent her and witness whatever event or Akashic record or part of a person's physique or to diagnose illness or whatever she wanted to look at. She could look at it kind of consciously. So she would have this image of what she saw, and then her spirit would have to like come back and then try to describe what it had seen in her own words. So she's consciously using her conscious mind to describe what she saw consciously while in this trance state. Or it could be some communication, like sometimes there would be an entity like speaking and she would be hearing it, and then she would have to parrot back the words or paraphrase or whatever, whichever of those 2 options. Sometimes I guess she would just completely parrot back what they were saying. Sometimes she would paraphrase in her own words. And I'm thinking there was a third. Of course. So that's kind of one possibility. And then another one was I guess so that's kind of 2, because those are kind of 2 different things I described there, where one, she's just operating on her own, witnessing things and talking about them. And then number 2, there's another entity involved, and she's interacting with that entity and talking about it. And then there's a third option where her conscious mind would kind of go off in a corner and sit there and try to stay out of the way and let the entity communicate through her. But apparently this wasn't as easy a process as it would be through someone like Edgar Cayce, because the minute she started to get intrigued by whatever was being said, it would color that communication. And so you might have her words come in there a little bit and interject, or she might interfere with a clear communication process, and you'd get a garbling of the message or something. And she described this as being a continual ongoing struggle to try to mentally balance these things, like stay out of the way when she was supposed to. And so what I'm getting at is this is describing another type of mediumship, and these entities through her were claiming that there were advantages of that over the Edgar Cayce type. Some of them being that her recall, of course, would be there. So she could, and this would often happen. It'd be kind of like a dream where a medium would apparently witness something very complex, like an event or something. And then even later on, after the session was over, she may remember new things about it and be talking about it. So it's not a reading in the sense that, the communication's coming through in the stream and you have to catch it. It's just a reading in the sense that she just saw something and she's talking about it, but she can still talk about it later, that kind of a thing. And also, I guess there are other advantages they talk about in the book, advantages of having your conscious mind there. And on that note, there is a Paul Solomon reading. I don't remember if it's on wisdomofsolomon.com or on the Paul Solomon Foundation website. I'll have to go find it or something. I guess I can look really quick. But it wasn't a regular reading, because what it sounded like is he was in waking life. He was describing, or no, it's not like, it's like he was in a trance, but his normal conscious mind was still active, and he was just seeing this scene, this activity of life in ancient Atlantis that they had gone back to, and he was just talking about it. So this sounds a lot like, in hypnotism, a regular past life regression, where they'll send, so I don't know if you called that the conscious mind per se, but I mean, it really is, because the person does remember it when they come out of the hypnotic state, once they've done a hypnotic regression like that. So I guess that must have been just what it was, just a simple, but I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're talking about in this Betty book, because I don't think they went through the normal hypnotism kind of things, but I don't know. Look how far I am in the book. So I've still got most of it to go, and yes, the Urantia book has been taking most of my time. So yeah, I don't have to pull out that particular Paul Solomon reading, but maybe you can just look at the ones they've got for ancient history in Atlantis or something on there, and there's one where he's just describing himself like riding on this flying machine with the tactical display that's kind of half psychic, half electrical, something tactical display. So he's like psychically aware of all of the objects around his ship, and like a rudimental map around the ship. So it's kind of like a GPS with detection of, with radar or something, all operating psychically by some machine that taps into his mind while he's riding this flying machine. It's just crazy, but it's completely unlike a normal reading. So yeah, I guess there apparently are advantages to that kind of thing, and it does sound very similar, because Andrew Jackson Davis, what he said would happen for the principles of nature is he would go get some information with his mind, come back and talk about it. Then he'd have to go back, get some more, come back and talk about it. So it was all in these laborious snippets. And when he was dictating the book, it's almost like he would go to the psychic realm, read a line from the book or hear it dictated from somebody, come back, have to dictate that line to the people in the room, and then, again, and no wonder, if that's what he was doing, no wonder why he went to the automatic writing method later on, which is what he apparently did with the Great Harmonia and subsequent works. And this is another type of automatic writing. I've heard it described by Davis and somewhere else. I can't remember exactly where. It might have been in the Betty book. Yeah, it might have been. But the idea here is that, so he's in that kind of state where he's in a trance that's deep enough where he has this paranormal awareness, and he can go view these things in these other realms. Like, he can consciously view the Akashic record, or he could consciously hear some statements from another person or read them. So instead of having to come back and speak those, he can just write them. And I'm not really sure if that's what happened when he did the Great Harmonia, because the event that he describes when that all started is an event where he didn't have this person that put him in a trance with him. He was just staying with some other people. But there was a lady in the house that was sick, and he really wanted to help her. And he went to sleep that night really, really wishing there was something he could do. So there was this strong will, this strong desire. And his roommate that was with him described this scene where, in the middle of the night, in the complete dark, Andrew Jackson Davis gets up, goes over to the shelf, grabs the pen and inkwell, and parchment, and he sits down at the desk and writes for like 15 minutes to half an hour or something, and then goes back to bed. And the next morning they both wake up, and here's this piece of paper with these perfectly written line by line of instructions on, it was basically like a health reading for this woman. And there were some interesting things about that. That was definitely a circumstance where he was not conscious. He did not remember it. He didn't remember doing it. It was almost like he was reading some instructions somebody else had written. And it was more like a reading in that sense. And in the sense that it was complete and straightforward and all delivered at once, apparently. And he used that as an example of how he learned how to be free of a conductor and still dictate these works, or however you want to say it. So purportedly, that's how the Great Harmonia and subsequent books, like here's volume 1 of the Great Harmonia. By the way, on that topic, this is by Elibron Classics, Elibron. And that's a company, one of the companies that just takes these public domain books, I guess, and makes a decent facsimile. So these are all facsimiles where they basically take a photocopy of an old book. So you'll have things like, look at the number at the top of that page where it's like cut off. And it's the exact font they use back. They just take a photograph of the page basically and print it. And so this is a facsimile of 1863 edition, I guess. And but they do, it's nice to have it in form like this instead of just going to Google Books and getting the PDF, which is exactly the same thing, a facsimile. So that Elibron Classics, they have the Principles of Nature in 2 volumes, and then from then on, I think they all fit into 1 volume. And they have all the volumes of the Great Harmonia except for volume 3, which you have to get somewhere else. I'm not sure why they don't have volume 3. I guess it wasn't that popular, or they couldn't get a decent copy or something. But anyway, so according to Andrew Jackson Davis, he was in this kind of deep trance automatic writing state without a conductor when he did those books. But then when he describes a lot of the other processes other times, what he's talking about is exactly what this Betty book is talking about, where he's still conscious, and like definitely that's some of the things he did. Like, because one time he has an account, I think this is in the Principles of Nature, or it could be the Great Harmony, I'm not sure, but it's where he is basically with a woman who's near death. He was just trying to do whatever he could, which wasn't much, I guess, and everybody knew she was about ready to pass on. So he deliberately threw himself into this trance state where he was psychically aware the whole time, so the whole evening. And so he saw the moment when she died, and he saw this whole process where her soul gradually came out of her body and rematerialized above it, and then went on, and all this stuff. And he describes in detail the whole process. And that process, where he's still conscious, is identical to the process that they're describing, that Stuart White is describing in this Betty book. So, and it says here that Betty is Stuart Edwards' wife, so I guess it's somewhere along the line they got married, because they definitely weren't when this whole story started. So I guess she would have been Betty White later on. I don't know what her maiden name was. Anyway, so this looks like a real interesting thing. But the readings are basically in snippets. They have lots of portions of text in here that are in quotes, and those are supposedly direct or fairly direct from the source that's communicating through Betty in this type of trance. But then it's interspersed with a lot of his own text. So it's almost like he has to explain things, and they grab quotes here and there. And I believe that's how these other books are done too, but I haven't really looked into them in detail. Well, actually, check this out. They have the question and answer kind of thing. Betty Invisible, Betty Invisible. Well, and they'll do that, yeah, and they did that once or twice in the Betty book too. So they'll give a direct question and answer kind of thing when it's appropriate. But I guess a lot of times they had to piece things together due to the nature of the communication. So I don't know if I'm really ready to call that a viable source in the sense that these other ones are. But if you discount her, in a way you have to discount Andrew Jackson Davis. But we've had issues with him before. So I don't know. Maybe we have to start be more specific about what type of communication each of these things are, so you can kind of gauge the type of purity. But from the description of the entities that were communicating through her, it sounded like you could possibly get very, very clear communication through a channel that was still conscious like this. But it had its own pitfalls. But also, if you just read Edgar Casey and the source's description of the process there are pitfalls, and I'm sure these other sources touch on it at some point. Perhaps Paul Solomon did. I can't really remember right off. But the idea you get is that there are different things that can interfere with the process. Well, heck, that Ross Peterson book where he took some kind of painkiller and got a couple really messed up readings that were way off. So obviously there are things that can interfere with that process too. But the advantage of the deep trance technique is that the conscious mind is gone. The person is effectively unconscious, and there being a clear channel that's being communicated through. But, here again, I'm getting that Douglas Cottrell reading when I'm asking about this type of thing, and he's telling me that no channel is 100% clear, or that seemed to be the gist of it. And it's like, and we kind of knew that. It just makes you wonder what the limitations are of a direct communication, where an entity is directly communicating, like the Urantia book. So, maybe you could segue into the Urantia book. Dun, dun. Oops. The Urantia book. This fabulous hardcover edition. I love this thing. And believe it or not, this is 2,000 pages, and they're these ultra fine pages like you get in a Bible, where they're really almost like tissue paper kind of thin. And it even comes with the bookmark, boy. This book was channeled in the deep trance tradition, obviously. There's absolutely no way it could be anything else. And I even found a spot where they talk about that. It was where they're talking about guardian angels and the different types and who gets one and who doesn't and all this stuff. They were talking about this type of guardian angel that channels for the source got. And, I'm confusing two different passages. The one where it's talking about guardian angels was just using the channel as an example, and they said that. That was like the only time I've run across so far where they actually mention the process by which this is being delivered within the book. And it does say the channel through which they're communicating, that person, his guardian angel was, and they give the identification number. I guess apparently those guardian angels are according to the book, they're classified by number and name, but more relevantly by number, and it depends on I don't know how much detail I want to get into there, but they did mention the channel there, and they also again mentioned these deep trance type of channels in a section that was talking about the what's the reserve corps called? There's some kind of reserve corps of people that is there in reserve, even though they don't know it. So these would be entities on the earth that apparently are being taught subconsciously, if you will, extra things by their higher self. And no, it's not the core of finality. And prepared for times of emergency, if you will. And there are apparently a few of those that can communicate. So the basic statement was that all the people that are in this reserve corps, well, I really want to find the name of that. Well, I don't want to waste valuable screen time here. So most of the people in that reserve corps don't know that they're in it, and there are very few, apparently, that can actually communicate. So that was the only exception. So there are some people in this reserve corps that can communicate, and those are the only ones that have a clue that they're part of something bigger. But what they were describing was channels along the lines of Cottrell and Ross Peterson and Casey. So, and since there were only a few of those, they gave the number, and there weren't very many. So there were like, at the time the book was written, they said there were about 1,000 in this reserve corps on the earth, I think is what they said. And there were only like 20 that could act as channels. So only about 20 or less than 20 that knew anything about it. And they were the contacts. I think that was the word it gave. They were the contacts. Apparently I'm not meant to talk about that in any more detail because I can't find this section. The book is so in-depth. At first I started just plowing through the beginning, and about 1/10 of the way through the section where it's talking about the nature of God, I finally got bored of that, and it's just that there were other things that attracted my attention more, so I started leaping about, reading various sections. So I've read a lot of the sections on the nature of your higher self and the life course of mortal man, basically, according to this book. Because one thing that I've been fervently pursuing is this problem of reincarnation, meaning in this book it doesn't mention reincarnation per se, at least not directly. And but furthermore, it talks about this whole world life perspective in tremendous detail, as if reincarnation wasn't a part of it. So what it describes is it describes the human life, the mortal life, as the beginning of your soul. And it describes it as if your higher self gets assigned to you when you're 5 years old. I guess that's about the end of your 5th year is about the typical time. And that's the first time you've met that higher self, but then that higher self will be with you from then to all eternity. And then during this lifetime, the interaction between your mind and your higher self writing upon the fabric of the subconscious or something basically creates your soul. And so it's like your soul is born then. And it does talk about the indwelling spirit of God as being a third part of that. So you could say, yeah, that's the same as these other readings where we're all supposed to be this eternal piece of God. But the way they portray it here is that it's almost like from our perspective currently. You know, your average Christian assumes that this life is the beginning of the soul, so the book just runs with that. Perhaps that's one reason why. And in it was either the Cottrell readings. I think it was a Cottrell reading. Somebody asked, "Why didn't Jesus teach about reincarnation?" Or it might have been Paul Solomon. I can't remember. And then or it could have been that. Just losing it. Somewhere along the line, somebody did ask that for a source and asked why Jesus didn't teach about reincarnation in his ministry. And the answer was, well, because the whole point was he was trying to teach people how to escape the cycles, escape the wheel of karma, not to stay on it. And so there was absolutely no point in a culture where that wasn't a focus. There was no point in dwelling on it. He was teaching people how to go beyond, go to heaven. And that chimes, jives exactly with the perspective of the Urantia book. But also when I went back, out of sheer frustration last night, about 1 a.m, I went back and read through all the relevant sections in the Secrets of Life book by Douglas Cottrell, delivered by that source. And in there, if you read it, there's nothing that really conflicts with the Urantia viewpoint. It's just that it's just a matter of perspective. In the readings so far, like with Solomon and Casey and Cottrell, when they talk about the scope of the human life and then the existence beyond, it's very much focused on the human life. It's like you have your magnifying glass on the human life, and then we'll talk about the part beyond, just a little bit. But So they may spend a few paragraphs talking about everything that happens beyond, once you no longer have to return to the source or no longer decide to. That'll just be a few sentences. Whereas in the book of Urantia, that is several major sections of the book, chapter after chapter after chapter. It's like endless detail on what happens afterwards. And almost no focus on what's happening during the life in comparison. So I almost think that this isn't a case, so far anyway. My perspective is that no, this isn't a case where the Urantia book and Andrew Jackson Davis have a completely opposite portrayal. So it's not like you have the no reincarnation viewpoint from the Urantia book, and then the reincarnation viewpoint from Solomon, Casey, Peterson, and Cottrell, all these other sources. No, it definitely seems to be a matter of emphasis. Because in the Urantia book, because it's so detailed, there are a substantial number of statements from time to time about things like your career on this earth and the ages of that career. So obviously not a single lifetime. And then your career, your sojourns in the planetary worlds, or your sojourns in the worlds of mortal existence. In passing, it talks about those things, but that's it. Its focus is definitely not on that kind of thing. But it does talk about, does tip its hat to those concepts here and there. And those fit in exactly with the presentation we get from the other sources, where they give this portrayal that once this life is over, you'll go back to the astral plane or these spiritual realms beyond somewhere, and have these schools where you kind of recover and learn about what just happened, and schools that prepare you to make a decision about what you want to do next. And what that can often involve, according to the traditional readings of Casey and others, what that can often involve is another sojourn in this earth, or another sojourn in another planet in this system, or some other system. Other sojourns in a mortal incarnation where flesh and blood kind of incarnation, where you have a lot of the same type of problems, the same type of isolation from the spiritual and things like that, so that you can address a lot of the issues. You can grow in a lot of the same ways that you do here on Earth. And it's just that why this is such a struggle is that in the perspective from the readings of Casey, Solomon, Cottrell, and Peterson and others, or at least those are the main ones I've read so far, from their perspective, so much of our existence so far, in fact, all of our existence so far, has been in these types of sojourns in planets like the Earth and other places like it. They will say once in a while that, yeah, maybe you could spend a lot more time in the astral plane somewhere or some of the other spiritual realms, that it's a choice. You might just choose to come back or choose to go do something else. And so looking back, I guess it may have just been my take on it, what I took from those descriptions. And I think my take was a little bit biased towards the wheel of karma and incarnations in flesh and blood planets. And when they would only mention sojourning in the higher realms in between, when they would only mention that in passing, well, I would only think about it in passing. However, when you read the Urantia book, it forces you to think about these sojourns in the higher realms almost exclusively, because that's almost exclusively what it deals with. So I guess I would say, on the one hand, of course, incredibly valuable because it provides so much information that's the other sources just don't have time to talk about. But also, it's disconcerting because the apparent difference in emphasis just kind of knocks you off your rocker. You spend your whole time thinking, wait, what about reincarnation? What about reincarnation? And you're like looking for all these hints about it, and there's only a few of them here and there. You start getting really frustrated, like who's right, who's wrong, and why are there two different accounts and all this. And one thing that was really interesting is when I was reading the Douglas Cottrell Secrets of Life book again last night, in the section about reincarnation and things, at the very end it has a paragraph where it says, okay, so that's one way you can think about reincarnation. Another way you can think about it is imagine the accounts of all your lifetimes as books on a shelf. Now, you could read through those books in order and imagine them as occurring in a series according to the timeline or whatever, but also understand that all of those books are on the shelf at the same time. All of those words are up there. They are all simultaneously there, and by the same token, you are simultaneously going through all of your lifetimes. You're going through every instant in all of your lifetimes at the same time. There really is this never-ending present. There is no time. And that kind of made me do a double take when I read it again last night, because I was like, oh, well, wait a second. Maybe part of the problem here is I'm thinking of things in terms of the constraints of this universe we live in, the constraints of three-dimensional space and time, where you can't have objects existing more than one place at a time, and you can't have events occurring with an entity. You have an entity being involved in events at more than one place at a time in our system, but those kind of constraints definitely don't hold in the spiritual realms, at least in a lot of them. Now, the Urantia book does say some of the astral plane realms and things are governed by time. Other parts of the spiritual realms are not. I mean, it kind of talks about the contexts in which time is relevant to think about. But I think what we could be looking at here is just kind of a general statement about, and that does seem to be what it gives. It gives this general perspective about your incarnations, your mortal incarnation. And that could be encompassing all of your sojourns on Earth and all of your sojourns in other mortal existences and other places. And it kind of just lumps all those together as nothing but preparation. So I'd like to spend some time talking about this Urantia perspective, because it seems so valuable if you just get past that. By the way, though, for people coming from a traditional Christian perspective and things where you don't believe in reincarnation, this perspective is for you. And this picks right up where the Bible left off, and it refers to the biblical accounts all over the place. Definitely designed to expand on the messages conveyed in the Bible and not argue with any of them or contradict any of them. So it basically carries on with that viewpoint given by Christ, where, okay, look, you're living this life right now. That's all we're going to talk about. This life and then heaven. That's the main focus. You're supposed to be living this life to move on, not to come back. So we're not going to talk about coming back. We're talking about this life, being more godlike, being more Christ-like, and therefore going to heaven when you die. And in the Christian perspective, that's about all you get, you know. Here, you get the detailed description of what really happens on your way to heaven, you know, basically. And if you ask thinking back to when I was really steeped in these Christian doctrines and talking to people about them, of course, just about anyone you talk to will say, yes, we don't know almost hardly anything about the new heaven and the new earth. We don't know hardly anything about the realms beyond. And of course, they're going to be far richer than our experience here. It's just that we don't know. And so they even know that there is something like this. Now, a lot of Christians would probably tell you just flat out, no, this account from the Urantia book isn't it. You know, and they may say that just because anything that was claimed to be specific knowledge beyond what the Bible is given would be thrown out from a lot of those bigoted sectarian perspectives. But nevertheless, for someone like me who is really desirous of knowing the truth and giving any account like this a benefit of the doubt, it is just, oh my God, you know, if this is really what it claims it is, and boy, it really seems to be, it's it. This is it. If you want a description of what's really going to happen and what the whole game really is, this is it. It tells you the whole rules, the whole system. Whether you want to know it or not, it gives you all of the details of the whole system, the whole scenario that we are in the middle of, what it all really is about and what's really happening. For me, that is a lifesaver, because one of the most frustrating things to me in the past was this sense of just complete anger and frustration that here I am in this incarnation in a black box, if you will, with no knowledge of the past, no knowledge of why I was here, no knowledge of what I'm supposed to do here, no knowledge of what the game is, what are the major goals, what are we supposed to accomplish, where's this going, you know, what's going to happen beyond, what should I be shooting for, what should I be trying to do with this life, you know, no concrete instructions. Well, for anyone who is hungering for more detailed information on the system, well, there it is, in the book of Urantia, in all of its glorious detail, and way more than anyone could possibly want. But all very consistent. I mean, this is not just some sci-fi crap that some idiots just decided to throw down on paper and get published really quick. This is perfectly thought out, perfectly self-consistent accounts from a number of different entities, none of which are higher selves of people. They are all entities beyond the mere higher self of I shouldn't say mere higher self being God himself, but all entities of tremendous authority. And again and again, you'll get the statement where they say, I know whereof I speak, or whatever. It's like, and they do. Oh boy, you know, it's like they know what they're talking about. So the what they do portray about our existence here is that a critical component of the human existence in mortal life is a decision. So this is almost identical to like the Protestant gospel. where people have to be saved. They have to have saving faith. They have to make this decision for salvation, this decision for God, or to decision to follow in the path of Christ or whatever. Well, really, that is perfectly right on, according to the book of Urantia, and it explains how. It explains that the decision we have to make is one of alignment. Here's this higher self that's been given to us, what it calls the mystery monitor or thought adjuster, an actual piece of God himself, if you will, living within us to help us move towards God, be more Christ-like, grow spiritually in wisdom and love and perfection and holiness. And here it is to help us, but we have a decision to make. Our decision is that what we want? Do we want to go that direction? Do we want the same thing that higher self wants? Is that where we want to go? Do we want to improve? Do we want to become more perfect and more holy? Do we want to progress? And that apparently is the critical decision that each one of us has to come to before we will be what it calls survivors, before we will survive and go on to continue to grow. So putting that together with the teachings from this other readings and its own teachings, it says again and again that all of the people in charge, God himself, they all are merciful. So we all get way more chances than we should possibly need to make this decision. And by connotation, that would naturally entail hundreds of thousands of incarnations if necessary, which apparently has been necessary for most of us. According to Cottrell or whoever, Christ himself having 30 incarnations, but on this earth. But nevertheless, there is a point at which we have been given enough help, where we've been given so many opportunities, so much help, to just make this decision to go along with it, if that's what we want. Where if a soul continues to say, no, that's not what I want. No, I don't want to have anything to do with God. I only care about satisfying my selfish desires and whims and carnal inclinations and sinful nature, if you will. That's all I care about. Well, there apparently comes a point where a decision then is made to say, okay, fine, we'll no longer try to push you in the other direction. And what happens then, apparently, is after that carnal earthly lifetime is over, then that entity, their higher self, will return to God for basically reassignment for other things, and their soul will return to God. It'll basically, their personality will just go away. Their existence will be recorded, as it has been recorded by the recording angel and thought adjuster and all this stuff. But that's it. So then they will, their soul will return to God. Their identity will be gone, and that's it. That's non-existence. That's the only hell there really is, aside from the pain of existence in lower places. But so that decision apparently is the crucial thing, and that apparently is sufficient. We don't have to necessarily join with our higher self in this lifetime. We don't have to join with our higher self and become perfectly enlightened to just escape the wheel of karma. All that's required is us to make that decision of alignment. And if we have made that decision for God, that saving decision, then all of the subsequent work can happen in the realms beyond. An incarnation in this earth is no longer necessary. So much more details about what happens after that in the book, of course, and I'll try to talk about that later, I guess, because now we're out of time. But until then, I think it's, if you are curious, definitely grab a copy of the Book of Urantia somewhere and delve into whichever parts catch your fancy and share and enjoy.